Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Great, thank you so much. And please do, we will take questions at the end of the panel. So each speaker will be talk for about 10 minutes, and then there will be designated time for Q&A. Okay, so I just wanted to get us started by introducing the topic we're going to be talking about today. And is everyone able to see my slides? I have some thumbs ups.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. I feel like I'm teaching again. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about building trust with open science. And we're specifically going to be focusing on open access publishing, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And of course, this is part of the International Conference of Young Scientists of the Global Young Academy. I'm your moderator, so you can feel free to email me if you have any questions after today's session. And I want to personally thank you all for taking time. I know there are a lot of workshops and online sessions happening all of the time right now. So I really appreciate you being here with us today. And I think this is a really important topic. Again, I just want to stress the code of conduct. So the full code of conduct is linked in the document that I put in the Google Doc in the chat. But just to go over a few of the key points, that we are committed to providing a safe and productive meeting environment that fosters open dialogue. I know there might be some differences in opinion of some of the things we're going to discuss today. So please do treat everyone with respect and consideration. This is a harassment and discrimination-free space. I also want to note again that you can submit questions for the speakers on Google Doc. You can be anonymous if you would like when you submit these questions, but keep this code of conduct in mind, please. So just backing up a little bit, open science is a really broad term and is defined differently by different people, but it's really about accountability and reproducibility, both of which are really important to building trust among scientists and with the public. And really important here is also these principles of inclusion, fairness, and equity, and this open sharing of knowledge. I've linked here to the Open Science Training Handbook, which is a really awesome resource for any of you who are wanting to learn more about open science. I briefly wanted to mention, because we are going to be focusing largely on open access today, that open science is a much bigger environment than just, or much bigger ecosystem than just open access. So really, open science should be practiced from the beginning of the scientific process through all the way to open engagement and outreach to the end of the process. So again, we're going to be focusing mainly on open access, but some of these other things might come up during the discussion today. And I encourage you to ask about them during the Q&A sessions if you are interested in these other aspects. And I have specifically asked our speakers to think a little bit when they, in their comments, not only about the trust among scientists, but also, again, focusing on how open science can support public engagement with science and trust in science. So for our agenda, we're going to have 5 speakers today. We're going to have Elizabeth Marincola and Shams bin Tariq are going to be our first 2 panelists, and they're going to talk a little bit more generally about open science and how it can promote trust in science, and in some cases, how it can actually hinder trust in science when things go wrong. Then again, we'll follow up these remarks with a 10-minute Q&A session and then a 5-minute break before we move on to the second part of our session, which is going to focus specifically on Open Research Europe as a case study in open science. So we will have Liz Allen, Victoria Tsoukala, and David Fernandez Rivas as our panelists for this part of the session. And again, we'll also have a 10-minute Q&A. And you'll see that we have some huge, names here. So really thankful to all of the speakers. And we also have some new GYA members. So David just joined GYA in the past year with me, and then some GYA alum. So we really appreciate the continued support of the GYA alum as well. I did want to also mention that after the session, if you would like to continue the discussion, there is a platform called Wonder that you can join to continue this discussion. So that information is linked here. And the Google Doc that I put in the notes has a link to these slides and any of the links therein. Before I pass it on to our first speaker, I just wanted to thank everyone again, particularly the GYA office who helped to organize this event, Jennifer, Anna Maria, Kirsten, and James, Kuhn, who helped to reach out to speakers, the GYA Open Science Group, and then, of course, the speakers themselves. I'm really excited to hear from everyone and to have the discussion afterwards. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Elizabeth Marincola. She's a senior advisor for the African Academy of Sciences and the AESA Open Science organization. With that, I will let Elizabeth begin.
There we go. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Very good to be with all of you today. Thank you for joining. Let me tell you a little bit about my background and what I was asked to speak about. I've been in the open access publishing world since it existed, and probably for that reason, I was asked to dedicate my time to talk a little bit about the history of open access publishing, AKA how we found ourselves in such a mess that we're up against the wall and scientists felt they had to seize control of the publishing process for their science. I was executive director of the American Society for Cell Biology, whose journal was the very first to be made available open access through PubMed Central. After some other activities, I joined the board of directors of PLOS and subsequently became the CEO of PLOS based in San Francisco. 4.5 years ago, I went to the African Academy of Sciences, whose programmatic arm called the Alliance for Accelerating Excellence in Science in Africa. And we launched a new platform there in order to enable African scientists to publish their work on a fully open, transparent platform. I actually will not go into detail about that platform because my colleague Liz Allen is going to be speaking in the next session, and we partner with F1000 in order to bring our researchers and the public that platform, and she'll be going into a little bit more of that format. But as I said, I'm here to talk about the history of science publishing and how we got here. Yes.
Elizabeth, before you get started, could you put your slides in slideshow in presenting view?
Sorry.
Oh.
Is that better? Okay.
Looks great.
Okay. As many of you know, the traditional research journal has existed for more than 3 centuries. And in fact, the very first journal to exist, the Philosophical Transactions, has been in continuous publication since that time. And traditional journals served an extremely important purpose. And interestingly to me, their purpose really has not changed that much. It's been enhanced in recent decades. But scientific journals exist, of course, to share science, but also to provide a date stamp to determine who was the first to make a certain discovery or a finding. They exist to validate science through peer review, which continues to be the gold standard in scientific publishing. They serve as a distribution mechanism. Of course, the nature of that has changed a great deal now that we have electronic means to distribute our science, but the printing and shipping of scientific journals was a very important service when that was the only form in which journals existed. And also importantly, they serve an archival function. They memorialize findings so that they can be found evermore into history. So findings are not lost to peers. Of course, now they're much more findable. We used to have to go through Index Medicus to find what we're looking for and go through dusty shells to find a volume, but now, of course, our means are much easier. So how have we evolved in these last hundreds of years? We now have over 13,000 STM titles. We have many publisher types. We have commercial publishers. We have scientific societies that are publishers. That's the case with Philosophical Transactions. They're published by the Royal Society in the UK. And we have nonprofit independent publishers, which include organizations like PLOS. We also have multiple business models, and it's important to know that business models and publisher types are two separate variables. Because nonprofits can produce subscription titles and commercial publishers can produce fully open access titles and so forth. We also have variations on the theme of open access, including preprints and open platforms, which our platform is. I know another speaker will be talking about predatory journals. One of the downsides and something that has indeed undermined public trust in journals a great deal are predatory journals. Those that I define predatory journals, although it's a bit amorphous to be able to define them, as journals that make promises of services, particularly editorial services, that they do not provide, and therefore they collect APCs from unwitting scientists and laboratories and publish them as if they're credible science, or don't publish them at all without providing the peer review and other indexing and other services that they promise. That's what makes them predatory. And as I say, that'll be gone into a little bit more in another part of the presentation. Why is it important to publish? These reasons also have not changed over the year. Scientists are entirely dependent upon publishing their work in the global culture of science for many reasons. Typically, they cannot get funding without having published their work. They can't get hired in the first place. They can't be promoted. They can't get tenure, get awards, whether it's a modest award or the Nobel Prize. They have no credibility in the scientific environment without having published. They have no visibility. And in some countries, notably China, researchers get a direct financial reward for publishing, and it can even go so far as having the amount of the reward be directly associated with the impact factor of the journal in which they're published, which is, I believe, damaging in many ways, but that is indeed the case. So I've touched on some of the problems with traditional science publishing, and by that I mean subscription-based publishing, whether or not there is a printed product. The way that we initially compelled, for example, the United States Congress and Parliament in the UK to pay attention to this problem is that we pointed out to them that public sources paid multiple times for the same research. So they funded the grants in the first place. Then they had to fund what were called at the time page charges, printing charges, color charges, other ad hoc charges to the publisher. And then they had to pay very expensive subscription costs for their constituencies to be able to access the findings that they funded in the first place. So this was a very pricey and, one might say, unfairly pricey endeavor for the typically governments that funded research in the first place. The system we had before, where you submit a piece of work to a journal, it had to be in a standard format. It was reviewed behind closed doors, and then the scientists received the verdict as to whether or not the paper would be accepted or not. Bred by definition bias, because there was no transparency in the system, We like to say that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and that's certainly the case in open access publishing, and a certain amount of what we call the old boys network, that is people favoring the research coming from people they were already familiar with. So you can see how this cut out people who were less connected and less known in the scientific community and worked against them. It took a long time to get science out, because what did people do? They submitted their work to the most prestigious journal that they thought might accept it. It could take not only weeks, but months, or potentially even more, to have a decision made with regard to publish or no publish. And if that decision was negative, then they'd have to start all over again. Not only that, even when a paper is or article is accepted, typically revisions are required, and then excess time is built into that. Of course, access issues are front and center. There were subscription barriers, continue to be as well. In the last session, it was the problem of the least publishable unit was outlined, people trying to artificially amplify the number of publications to their credit by not telling a full story, but rather publishing the least amount of science they could in order to make a compelling case that it should be publishable. And very damaging was the very common usage in a closed environment of not providing the data on which claims are made, thus making the process of reproducing science, which is of course a very important part of the process, impossible for others researchers. Finally, I want to point out that all the wasted intellectual contributions in a closed environment, most notably the work of peer review. Those of you who have spent time reviewing peers' work know that the peer review, a thoughtful peer review, is in itself a very important scientific output. And this information was not only not available to anybody other than the editor and the authors, but no credit was often given to the people who spent so much time to doing that. And then, of course, on the printed page, articles are static, can't be changed. I'm reaching the end of my allotted time. I just wanted to tee up then why we decided to launch in partnership with F1000 an entirely open, transparent platform that allows our researchers to submit their work as long as it's credible and they provide their data in an appropriate, shareable, mineable, accessible format. It is published first, and then it goes through the process of peer review. In the meantime, it is not held back. Others can see it. Others can see the data associated. Others can comment on it. And at such time that it passes proper peer review, so it is fully peer reviewed as in traditional journals or open access journals. At that point, it is indexed in all the major indices, PubMed, Scopus, Web of Science, and so forth. So this is the nature of open publishing that I believe is the future of scientific publishing, that it will come to dominate scientific publishing because it is so important to researchers, to the authors, and perhaps most important, the public, any of whom can access the findings. In the early days when we were advocating for open access publishing, one of the arguments we made was that you needn't be part of a scientific community to access findings. And inevitably there would be a retort, well, members of the public can't possibly understand research anyway. Not only is this oftentimes not the case, but it very much is the case that there's nothing like a life-threatening illness, especially in one's child, to make one come up to speed very quickly and motivate one to start understanding enough science that being able to know what's going on in the corresponding scientific field is not only important, but indeed vital. So I encourage everybody to defend against the accusation that the public couldn't read it even if they could read it. This is simply not always the case. Okay, those are my remarks.
Thank you so much. Can we have a round of applause, please? You can unmute or just use the little, there you go. We got some. Thank you so much. And thank you, Elizabeth, for being aware of the time. I'm going to hold on questions. Please do add any questions to that Google Doc, but we'll take all of the questions after Shams speaks. So I'm going to quickly pass the mic over to Shams bin Tariq, who's going to talk to us a little bit more about predatory publishing. And with that, I'll let you do your screen sharing. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you very much. I will actually skim through most of my slides because I will try to finish in less time. So my talk is less about predatory journals, more about the open access, author pays model of open access. This is some of the results that we got from our survey in the IAP working group, that if predatory publishing is allowed to continue, then these things will happen. And you can see these are all go against the trust in science. But then I would just like to show these. This is these are. Let me not explain, but this is kind of showing the growth of open access. And if we plot the growth of publishers on Beall's list, that goes like this. And this is another plot. And again, you see you can see why people see a connection between open access and predatory publishing. But what I want to say is that the problem is not with open access itself. The problem is with the author pays model of open access. Open access itself is fine, but the author pays model, initially it was thought that the funder or the institution would pay the open access charges, so it's fine to shift this over. But what I want to say is that the author pays model leads to perverse incentives, in the sense that publishers no longer need to sell to readers. They can afford to sacrifice quality. And if they relax quality, you get more acceptances, higher revenue. And it's easier for a briefcase business to become a publisher. Because it's, in fact, this is what we are seeing these days, that now these predatory publishers are popping up anywhere, and not only predatory, but other weak publishers as well. So, and there are no dearth of authors needing a publication, so you can always find a customer. And authors don't have the bargaining power. Libraries can form consortia and they can try to bargain, but authors are alone. So author charges can be hiked, and you will see, we are already seeing how author charges are going up very sharply. And then it's also another process that we are seeing is that new journals with lower entry barriers are created to cater for leftovers. And these are the slipping standards that provide perverse incentives for predatory practices, if not predatory journals. And these in turn lead to loss of trust in science. So what was done is you take the barrier out from here but put it here. And we know what is happening with this. So what we want is that there should be no barrier at all. And so I would like to talk about a few alternative models of open access that are not author-based. First of all, I mean, this is something that people are not usually aware, that there are whole ecosystems like Latin America, where academic publishing is in principle not for profit. There is, it is not a commercial industry. It is something that is funded by institutions, by the government. It's publicly funded. even in DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals, there is 72% of the journals are non-APC based, so they are free to publish. So it's not that everything has to be author based. There are ways of funding, and there are great examples of green open access, like the archive, which in my area of particle physics, astronomy, cosmology, things like that, it's working wonderfully. But the problem is that I'm sorry. This is how do you transform green? Well, I mean, green or diamond is fine. If you have a preprint or if you have diamond open access, that's fine. But it doesn't work everywhere, and you need to transform the existing subscription-based journals to open access. How do you do that? That's where author pays came in. So what I'd like to draw attention to is that there are models like Scope 3 and the Open Library of Humanities and other novel subscribe to open models. Scope 3 is the sponsoring consortium for open access to publications in particle physics. So here it's like libraries pool their subscriptions and they sponsor the open access. This is working fine with particle physics, and it has made everything open access. There are no author charges, nothing. But it is often criticized that it doesn't work for other disciplines. It does not scale. So the Open Library of Humanities is another one that is very similar to Scope, where there's a library partnership that comes together, and it pays. There are no author facing charges. It's a consortium of libraries that makes the payment. So this is a very good example of a very similar model working in a very different discipline like humanities, for which open access or open science is kind of sometimes a more distant issue. And then talking about scaling, there are these new approaches which are called subscribe to open. These are being tested. In fact, they started testing it this year and PLOS has 2 journals that are now subscribed to open, and annual reviews have a few journals that are now going subscribe to open. It's basically they take subscriptions, and once the subscription crosses a certain threshold, the journal becomes open access. So still uses library funds, but it becomes open access. So my last slide is that the author pays model is already producing many ill effects. I didn't have time to talk about the other ill effects. For example, barriers for authors, and this is already a very major issue in many countries for people in the developing world, and for even in the developed world, or even in anyone who is struggling with funds, who does not have whose research is not fully funded, or institution does not have money, they are struggling. So, and Plan S has certainly resulted in a swing in favor of the author pays model, though Plan S formally does not support any particular model, but they are led by funders who support authors. So they have gone through the channel where they say that the authors need to publish their research open access. So they support the author pays model. And suddenly we find publishers. Remember that the open access movement was initially a fight against the publishers' paywalls. And now suddenly we find all the publishers to be pro open access. Every single publisher in the world today, they pose to be open access friendly. That's because the author pays model is what it suits their business. They're also quite tired fighting leakages and things like that. So in the end, what I want to say is that we need to explore alternative models and bring them into the mainstream. And this will be a very uphill battle, because we have to fight these publishers. We have to fight the interests of the business interests of publishers, and this whole swing in favor of author pays open access. And I would like to call for a clear understanding and involvement for future science leaders like members of the GYA. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Can we have a quick round of applause for Shams? I like the call to action, and I think that this is a great lead-in talking about alternative models to hearing a little bit more about one of these models, about Open Research Europe. So thank you so much for persisting and making it back to us, and for lining us up so well for the second set of remarks here today.
I'm very sorry. If there are questions in the chat, I can reply in the chat perhaps.
Yeah, replying in chat. I have kept a list of questions so we can also always answer in the doc afterwards. I would like to again introduce Victoria Tsoukala. She is the, sorry, my screen's got all messed up too. Victoria is the Open Research Directorate of General Research and Innovation at the European Commission. Victoria, you can go ahead. Looks like you got your slides up. Great.
Yep.
I'll let you start.
Yep. Good evening, good morning. I'm Victoria. I'm a policy officer. Actually, I think, yeah, that is missing from here. So sorry, Tasha. And thank you for the invitation. So, okay, we had planned for Liz to present first with more information on what Open Research Europe is. So I will refrain from that information only very briefly to tell you that Open Research Europe is a publishing platform. So it's a peer review publishing venue, like basically the other journals you publish in. But however, it follows the model, the publishing model that Elizabeth Marincola described earlier with regard to the new platform that's been developed with the African Academy of Sciences. So namely, first you publish, and then your paper passes through peer review. And then if it has two positive evaluations, then it is indexed. Everything is out in the open access, open science. So both the publication, the reviews, the names of the reviewers is a very open process. And I will base my discussion regarding building public trust with Open Research Europe partly on the process. So, but before going there, I wanted to give you just the brief spiel we usually have regarding the European Commission. So the European Commission is the body that in Europe, in the European Union, that proposes legislation and monitors its implementation across the member states. It works with the European Parliament that votes the laws and the Council, and invites also member states to act. And of course, passes, the laws that it proposes and the policy it proposes also comes internationally, collaborates internationally for passing policy. So, for example, an example of EU law actually is the Open Data Directive, because directives must be are obligatory to be transposed into member state legal systems. So this is the directive regarding public sector information that was refurbished and is now called Open Data Directive. And it also includes actually research data funded by public funding. But also we collaborate on international policy with bodies, for example, such as the OECD. And here is a recent collaboration of last year that resulted in not only ours, of course, but all members of OECD to recommendations on access to research data. We are also a funder, so we fund a competitive research in the EC. Currently we are we have finished preparing our new funding program, which is for the next 7 years, 21 to 27. It's named Horizon Europe, and it's close to 100 billion euros in collaboration, of course, with all the member states. And this is the biggest public, of course, funding scheme in Europe. And many of you probably, or some of you already have grants from Horizon 2020. So Horizon Europe is the successor funding scheme. And finally, we also work as a capacity builder. So we support research facilities and fund infrastructures to support our EU policy. Open Research Europe is one of those infrastructures, a service that we offer to grantees of Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe, so that they can comply with our policy, among other things. So, and of course, we have also funded the European Open Science Cloud, which is a huge federation exercise of services that concern research across Europe. including also the COVID-19 data platform, which is a platform where people can store and access research data regarding COVID-19 from 90 countries and currently hosts, I think, more than a few million entries across Europe and beyond. So Open Research Europe then is such a service for our grantees. And why did the Commission, who is a funder and a policymaker, go to do this? We did it to support our open access policy, and our framework policy, Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe, has a mandatory open access requirement for peer-reviewed publications. So we don't force people to publish open access, but the requirement, you can publish wherever you want, but the requirement is for open access through a repository. And in fact, while currently we allow a delay for open access of up to 6 months or 12 months for SSH, in Horizon Europe, which is the new framework program, open access must be provided immediately, so at publication time. So we developed Open Research Europe to support our open access policy, help beneficiaries adhere to it, and also we enable them, of course, to publish post-grant, needless to say, at no cost to them. I think Liz will cover this, but of course we cover the cost. So it's a non-author facing fee platform, since the Commission covers those expenses. The Commission is also interested in leading by example in operationalizing open science principles. And I told you earlier that Open Research Europe publishes open access, but also it fosters open peer review, since this is the model it uses. And aside from that, we are very much interested in supporting and enabling trust in science, also basically through the transparency of the process, but also enabling as much as citizen participation is possible. Also in the content of the European research area, which is actually our pledge to create as much a coherent, a unified space across Europe for researchers. And this also includes the publishing and the accessibility of research to researchers and to society, which is a very important part of the European research area. So we also want to contribute to transparency, cost effectiveness of the publishing process, and explore sustainable open access publishing business models. So that's why, in short, we're implementing Open Research Europe in collaboration with F1000. So F1000 is our contractor. We have, for a question that was asked, we have published a tender in very, transparent procedures. The call for tender and all the terms of reference, the requirements are out there for everyone to see and have been out there for everyone to see. And there is a very strict procedure for awarding those tenders. So for us, we awarded to the best, the most, according to the rules for procurement of the European Commission. And so, if it were an F1000, would have been someone else, would still have awarded it, and nothing changes in their obligation, considering that now they form part of the Taylor and Francis group. But going to the main meat is building trust in science with Open Research Europe, or ORE, as we call it. Why? We build trust. I think we support seriously building trust in science, both with regard to researchers and to the society at large. The platform has rigorous publishing policies, which are out there for everyone to see, for all disciplines. There are, and we have also our scientific advisory board to help us with them. There are rigorous checks from the editorial team pre-publication, such as for plagiarism, from ethics, for data, for adheres to all sorts of policies of the platform and its requirements. As I explained earlier, the publishing model itself is very transparent, and it's also rigorous, and this is what you, the scientific community, contribute to the platform through the open peer reviews that you offer. And also, of course, it publishes born open access materials with reuse and attribution to authorship with CC BY attribution licenses for both authors and for reviewers. So this whole package of these elements that I just described, I think, supports trust in science for the research community and by the research community, actually. With regard to the citizens, actually, of course, the content is open to everyone. So citizens can access the content, but they can also participate. They can participate in the procedure by commenting. So commenting, if you register, so I mean, you cannot not register and provide junk comment, but if you want to participate in the process, you can contribute with comments as a citizen, as an interested individual, as a professional that has access to this scholarly content. Additionally, there are lay summaries, and this is not actually a mandatory thing for researchers, for authors yet, but we plan to work more on this in the future to make the content more accessible to non-specialists. So we have a keen eye on that. Additionally, we try to support multilingualism, and we will be implementing some features in the future. We currently the platform only works in English, so the publications are in English and everything is in the English language, but we are, especially in the context of multilingual Europe, multicultural, and equitable, the concept, the idea of equitable access, we will be working on this intensely in the future. Further, there are a lot of other features on the platform, such as blogs that discuss articles that discuss particular like the humanities or publishing in the humanities, etc., and social media that I think make the content and what is happening in the platform also more accessible to citizens. And of course, to the extent that citizens are participating in research projects that are funded by the European Commission as researchers themselves, as citizen scientists, then of course, absolutely their work can be published in the platform as can be published by that of, certified, let's say, researchers. So I think in all these ways, and maybe there's more ways that I can't think of right now, but citizens can participate, can trust the platform, but also can participate themselves in the platform. And I think overall in these ways, we can, we build trust through the platform, both for research and for researchers and for society at large. And I think so then it's just an invitation to you as early career researchers to submit articles for your for publication, and anyway check out the platform. I think there's great interest thus far, and we're very pleased with the acceptance by researchers in general and by early career researchers in particular. So I think that's it. I hope I did not go over my time. So
you're perfect.
Okay,
and I think actually your call to action to submit your article for publication will lead wonderfully into Liz's remarks to hear a little bit more about Open Research Europe. And I really appreciate your consideration again of public trust in addition to trust from scientists. So thank you so much for that. Can we have a round of applause for Victoria before we hear a little bit more about Open Research Europe? Great, thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to share my screen for Liz. So Liz, just do let me know when to proceed. I will do that.
And thank you so much, Natasha, for helping with this. And thank you, Victoria, for actually segueing nicely into the Open Research Europe. I'm just going to give a little bit more detail about how it works. And I think it actually feeds quite very nicely into what Victoria's just said. So those of you who aren't aware, this is a publishing platform that was launched earlier this year. And yeah, it's been commissioned by the European Commission. So next slide, please. And Open Research Europe F1000 is the provider of this platform. We've been providing platforms that aim to support research in the best way that we can and kind of move beyond some of the traditional ways of publishing, thinking very much about going beyond open access really our essence, and what we're trying to do is make research as usable and reusable and as accessible as possible. And that's what we've tried to do with all our solutions. We're constantly innovating, and I think what we're trying to do as an organization is really embed ourselves as a publisher, as a real service provider for the research and the researchers that we support. So we're trying to sort of make sure that what we do constantly evolves to support researchers in their task and all the kind of research parts of the research journey that the researchers are on across all the career stages and across all different types of contributions that teams and different parts of the research community make. So could you press next slide? There are 3 transitions here. Just press all 3, Natasha. So there was a public procurement, as Victoria mentioned. It was awarded to us in March 2020. It was a public open procurement. We also have partnered really closely with Eurodoc, the GYA, and thank you again for the invitation today to talk about this, and LIBA as collaborators on the platform, particularly to help us with communication and outreach and reaching different communities to talk about the platform through the different parts of the research system that they work with and they serve. We're also working very closely with OpenAir and a number of other kind of service providers to make sure that the content that we publish through this platform is syndicated and interoperable across different systems, because we want to, as I mentioned, one of our core aims is to make research discoverable and usable in a timely fashion as much as possible. And part of that, as we all know, interoperability across systems is a key thing that we're all trying to aim for at the moment. So we're working very closely to enhance the functionality around that. The platform was launched in Q1 this year, and all beneficiaries of the H2020 programme funding are eligible to publish on the platform. One of the interesting things we've been trying to do is make sure that we capture on our platforms really great funding data, really good institution data, so that we can help support, again, discoverability, but also things like, research linkages and allow people to bring their outputs together in lots of places. So we work with organisations like ORCID and Crossref to, again, build those connections. Next slide, please. What we've been doing as an organisation, we've been embedding all the pillars of open science into publishing. And as you're probably all aware, there are many different descriptions and definitions of open science, but these are often seen as the core pillars of open science, which are all about building trust and building usability and discoverability into the research and supporting collaborations. So next. So the key things are around open science, and there are, again, I mentioned lots of different definitions, but open science is all about, increasing collaboration, making sure that knowledge is discoverable, improving transparency and reproducibility in research, and making that research have integrity as well. And the key things that we have involved in the whole process for all F1000 platforms, but actually the European Commission platform particularly, we've been building up the capability around supporting open research data and materials, open research code, open peer review we provide, as Victoria mentioned, and the fundamental foundation block is making it all open access. So next slide, please. So this is the actual publication process. As I mentioned, we aim to design a publishing process right from the start that aims to maximize the potential for work to be used, reusable, and ultimately have real world and societal impact. So there are 4 kind of stages to the approach. So first click. So on the left, an article will come to be submitted to the platform. We conduct a series of rigorous pre-publication checks to support, integrity, the credentials of the authors, and make sure that the work is in a usable format. Next. Then we support access to the data. We have a fair data materials code policy, and like increasingly number of journals and publishers also do. But the key point there is to make that research reproducible, usable, and discoverable. and then we submit it to peer review. So it's a post-publication peer review model. The first 2 steps are designed to make sure that the research has credentials and has been checked before it's made public, but we don't hold up the publication of the article while the peer review process is going ahead. As has been mentioned a number of times already today, the peer review process itself, while we all appreciate that peer review is really important and a very under recognized profession, and it's massively important for science, it does bring delays into the whole process, and Open Research Europe has an approach that tries to take those delays in the ability for authors to share their work while the peer review process is being done in parallel. So once the work has been checked, it's published, then we submit it to invited open peer review. So experts are invited to review the work. It's not open peer review in that anyone can review, but it's done post-publication. And then the authors, the reviewers rather, produce comments, and they iterate with the authors so that new versions are produced. And once the threshold of acceptance has been passed, we call this past peer review, then suddenly the work is much more discoverable. It's sent to indexers and other repositories, and we make sure that it's kind of reached a kind of quality stamp of peer review at that point, which helps again to bring in transparency and trust. So next slide, and you can press all of them. So just to go a little bit more into the approach that we have, these again just going into the pillars of open science, and again this is all about trust and integrity. So open data and research code. So the platform requires that where possible the source data are made available upon publication, but we do offer protections around that. So if data needs to be protected or it's confidential, then we will support that. It has to have the respect of individuals, and again we have robust ethical checks as part of the publication process. It has to be consistent, of course, with the Horizon 2020 ethical and legal frameworks, and we operate a policy that again it's the way that we see that many people manage data, is that it's as open as possible but as closed as necessary. Next slide. And then open access, price transparency. We're also working very hard to try to address some of these issues that there are around open access costs. And again, that's been mentioned a couple of times today as well. So as part of the platform, we are open access. Everything has an open access license, but we are also very transparent about what the costs involved in doing the publishing are to make that work open access. So again, we hope that being transparent about the pricing involved helps build trust in this as a publishing model. Next slide, please. And then finally, just to go into open peer review a little bit, again, it's invited expert peer review, but we require that the reviewers' identities are made public on the site so that you can understand and maybe be really interested in specific individuals reviewing the work. We also screen for conflicts of interests. We publish their peer review reports alongside the articles. So we're finding increasingly that reviewer reports are an essential part of the scholarly record. Lots of people are really interested to see what reviewers have said and how work has evolved over time. We've been working really hard to try to improve the credit and visibility of the work that is done during the peer review process. So all the peer review reports themselves are citable. We work very hard to capture the ORCID IDs of all the reviewers to make sure that their contributions to the work of others is recognized, and there is a route to do that as a way to sort of help build trust and support for the model of being more open and collaborative in actually providing a peer review. And then finally, we also publish the status reports on the article, so you can see at any point in time how far through the peer review process an article is, and you can make your assessment about when you're ready to kind of use the work and build upon it. But we're not holding it up at any point while that process is being undertaken. It's still a very important process, but we're not building in any delays. We're trying to build trust in the ability for research to be shared rapidly and usefully. So that's all I wanted to say. Hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour of the Open Research Europe model, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much. Quick round of applause, everyone, please. And then I'm going to ask David. David is going to just share some remarks with us. David is a very impressive new member of the team. I think he's up for some National Engineer of the Year, whatever award. What is the award you just received or you were finalist for, David?
So it was the Dutch Engineering Society Prize for the year, something like that.
He's also an associate professor at the University of Twente and co-founder of Clean. So David's going to give some brief remarks, and then we're going to open up to the panel for Victoria, Liz, and David, and then we can take some more of your questions there.
All right. Well, thanks, Tasha, for this warm introduction. So I wrote down a few points in the last few months. So I've been working together with Liz also in the ORE platform. And so I've been collecting slowly impressions from colleagues, mostly more senior than I am. Because as it was discussed earlier, I think most of the curiosity or the reticence to jump into a new system comes from people who have already built their careers in a given way. So one of the main comments that I got was like, not all journals or disciplines are having the same problems or having the same pain. So sometimes it's kind of mind-boggling for some people, like, okay, you're trying to change something. It for us has been working very good for the last 20 years. But of course, some agree that there are problems that need to be addressed. I think that the most interesting element that would be interesting to discuss now with all the people we have here is like what happens when things go wrong. So we all know that peer reviewing has limitations, and happily, in most of the cases, reviewers do their job the best they can. But every now and then, sometimes you have retractions or you have things that don't go the way they should. So what happens in this sort of open review model, like your name has been associated to an article that is now retracted, but you originally kind of vouched for it. So I'm wondering if there are some sort of safeguards for the reviewers that are already doing extra work, even though now you have pull-ons and other ways to give some credit to the review and work. So is there some sort of protection for them, because they probably did their best to review the paper, but they might have missed some elements, or there might be some mistake that even after 3-4 reviewers, and even the whole community could read it, there might be mistakes, and what happens then? So one of, let's say, all the questions that I got from people who are, let's say, sniffing about the idea of this open access or ORE, it's like, well, isn't it already a bit elitist in the sense that only those who have some sort of big grant can publish there? And I think some answers can be given in this forum. And also, it would be interesting to know how is this going to be sustained after the 7 years that were mentioned. No? Like, there's a bit of funding for now, but after that money dries out, who's going to sustain it? And then, well, the last question I have is like, for those who are involved in not only, let's say, hardcore or traditional scientific work, but some of us are interested also in valorizing the knowledge, and the usual trajectory is to apply for a patent. And sometimes you get this sort of feeling that the whole traditional publication period takes long enough to give you time in parallel to work out your patent, to do, let's say, the IP protection, and then when the paper is out, you're already protected. So I wonder if this new ORE platform has some sort of advantage for scientists that are involved also on valorization or writing up a patent, or if somehow this platform can strengthen the work of the new knowledge that is being generated, so that it can be valorized down the road. So I think those are the main points that I collected, and in view of time, I think that those are more than sufficient to initiate the debate.
Can I start, Tasha?
Please go ahead. Yes.
And we'll Liz will contribute as well. So just to start from the immediate question, rather from the second question on the future of Open Research Europe, which is very reasonable for people to ask, and I think it was asked also in the Google Docs or somewhere. The Commission supports supports this platform as a publishing venue for its grantees, which means for Horizon Europe, and has committed to it. It also has committed to it through the communication on the European research area, and has put money on the side. And when it began a publishing, venue, it began knowing full well that you don't do a publishing venue for 2 years or 3 years, or even 10 years, or even way more than that. So seeing that there's also interest, we have formal commitment, but also it is my sense that this will actually be a project that will run for the long haul, if it is as successful as as we think it's going to be. So, but there is formal commitment for the European research area, which usually means about 10 years at least formally. So that's the least we can say, but I think we're fully aware that we are launching a publishing venue, and we're launching it with interest to have it for the long haul. So, I mean, the practicalities of whether it's a tender of, for us, and it's, of who will be our service provider should not concern researchers. A steady, consistent service that is not interrupted will be offered to our beneficiaries for a long while. We're also considering the possibility of collaborating with other funders that have asked the question, can we also participate in this, especially public funders from Europe, so that our grantees are able to publish. So we're also now starting to discuss amongst ourselves, the scenarios for after the 4 years when this tender ends, for the potential involvement of other funders or institutions. So that's one thing. I think the first thing that you asked, I have to say I'm very surprised, personally surprised. I mean, in my former life, I used to be a researcher. I used to be an archaeologist. So, and then, I did, the other things that the SSH people end up doing when they don't find jobs. Not quite, actually. I was fascinated by scholarly communication, but isn't it that, a researcher wants it all when they say, I want to say, provide, the peer review, but in a closed environment where, nothing happens to me if I, don't do that well. No, we are offering you a super open and transparent environment. And on the one hand, I can understand the hesitancy. On the other hand, frankly, I'm disappointed to hear that researchers say, oh, what's going to happen to me if, my view is not supported? It is the research process and the scientific process. And actually, this type of platform offers you the possibility to revisit things. It offers you actually the possibility of what one of our colleagues said. We had an expert group a couple of years ago chaired by Jean-Claude Guédon, and someone from there actually put forward the notion of not the version of record, which is what we call the very final publisher, camera ready PDF that is published, but a version of records is what technology and open science in a spirit of practicing open science enables. So, even if you, I think, have made mistakes, or even if your views are different, you can come back to it. There can be scholarly, scientific debate. And Open Research Europe, as well as other platforms, that's not the only one, that use this model, offer these possibilities. So I'm hoping that more researchers in the future will see this, without fear. Okay, you live in a profession where you're being evaluated and judged all the time, but so for me, it's not the model that is problematic, it's the current assessment system that is problematic, as Elizabeth said earlier. So in a sense, I'm trying to be very understanding of these worries, but on the other hand, I'm not going to say...
Well, just to have a short addition here, a younger researcher might be, seeing his comments with different way than a more senior. So it could expose, let's say, people.
Yeah.
I want a quick pause and say that we are technically at the end. I would like to take a few more questions if some of the panelists can stick around. I know we were asked to stay on time because there are a lot of sessions. So I do want to give those who need to take a break before the next session the room to do so. But I also want to make sure we fit in some of these really important questions and comments. So I'd like to give the panelists, if you are able to stay a few more minutes, some more time to talk through these things, but also welcome those of you who need to head out, and just thank everyone again for coming. So with that, I'm gonna let you guys keep talking. Yeah.
No, understandable. Maybe Liz wants to add something here. It's understandable, but and I also think actually, I think that Liz, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the platform offers actually features where in terms of peer review, if a young researcher peer reviews, they can do so also in collaboration, get credit, an early career researcher get credit for the review alongside, for example, a more established professor, or for example, so which works, both ways to support the researcher to, and also acknowledge the work that they're doing, but also on the side with of someone who's more senior. Liz, I'm right, aren't I, about this?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, you find a lot of journals already do this. They, when they send out something for peer review, they, other people support that peer review, and most of the people on this call have probably been involved in peer review in collaboration with someone more senior or a colleague, in fact. And we encourage naming of co-reviewers. So we encourage co-reviewing and we name them. Obviously, if they have an ORCID ID, we also capture that. So that's a really nice way to sort of take some of the sting out of if you are worried that you're reviewing, David, perhaps somebody who's really senior, and you can work in that way and support a more early career researcher. I just wanted to also mention a little bit about the point you made about if someone makes mistakes and it's retracted. I think, again, this is part of the whole trust in science, that we need to be more as a culture appreciative and aware that we make mistakes, right? And it's the culture of it's okay to get something wrong and actually, change something and change a view. That's what science and research does. So I think, that to always assume that what you knew was correct is also, it's the narrative around retractions has been really, really negative, but actually, to admit that perhaps something was wrong, or to not even admit, to move things in different directions and be appreciative of how things move and change and how views change is also really part of what we're trying to do here. It's all that, I guess that's one of the strengths of open science as well, is that you can have dissenting views, you can do it more collaboratively. I don't know we've got all the solutions in yet, and maybe, but I think we're really trying quite hard to kind of move together in a collaborative way to do that.
We are going to have to finish up in a couple minutes, but Jennifer has very kindly posted the Wander link in the chat just before. So let's try to finish up by 1:40. Just before we do that, I was wondering if we could, because this question also came up a few times in the Google Doc, talk a little bit more about this idea of this being an elitist platform, possibly. I'm using David's words, so don't blame me. In terms of publishing, are there any thoughts of allowing others beyond those funded by Horizon? I forget what the new name.
Horizon Europe.
yeah. Beyond that funding scheme?
No, that's a very good question, and apologies, I forgot about it. So it's Horizon 2020, which is the current framework, and Horizon Europe, which is the upcoming framework. So basically, I mean, even before the platform started, everyone wants to publish in it, which is really cool. So we are taking interest here. Well, I would like to take out the notion of elitist. It's as I said in the beginning, it is a service to our beneficiaries so that they can publish in open access without cost to them, and that they can comply to what we're asking them to do, et cetera, et cetera. So, and it's optional, right? So, I mean, you can do what you normally do, but you could also do that if you want. If nobody's forcing them to publish there. But yes, I mean, we are entertaining various scenarios for the future already now, because, planning takes a while. So, as I said earlier, there is one idea of allowing other funders to come in, and I guess in an interesting scenario of, let's say, collaborative funding, I could see that if there is a big interest of other funders and or institutions to funding, how we could possibly turn this into a collaborative funding model, so that anyone who's interested could publish. I mean, would be a bright idea. So that could be the Europe's publishing platform. So this of course could be, you know, I mean, we fully support this. Now the question is, can we make it happen? I mean, is there enough interest? Is this feasible? So we need to examine that without harming, of course, what we already have, because we need to be continuously offering this service. But also to say that you need to have partly, you know, partial funding from Horizon 2020 or Horizon Europe. So we're not asking that, you know, you have full funding. So if part of the work is funded by Horizon Europe, and in many cases we see that papers are produced with huge collaborations, then there's usually a way. So, and actually we have many papers from, you know, it's not only Europe, but other countries, the US and other countries. So really, although it's based in Europe, it is an international effort. So the broad answer is yes, and there is interest, and we're keenly aware of this interest, and we are investigating it.
Great, thank you. I see David has his hand up, so I'm going to give the last 3 minutes to him, and then I want to encourage everyone to please check out again, wonder if you're interested in continuing the conversation. I'll also post a link to the Google Doc. Again, there's some excellent conversation happening in the questions section of the Google Doc, so I will repost that. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, so my question, or how to say, interest is knowing, like, at some point the editorial process will end up kind of imitating or mirroring the way that established journals are working now. So there are two possibilities that I see. So I know most of the researchers I collaborate with are not really looking for the impact factor or these things. It's more like which audience is going to really read my message, or where can I have the biggest impact in the community? And then you go to the journals where already the editor knows who is good at this topic or who is better at this other topic. So how can you guarantee that the same level of quality of a revision can be established? Are you going to invite people from established journals? For example, if I have work on electrochemistry, and ORE has only access to people who have experience in other fields and not electrochemistry, how can you solve that?
I think maybe Liz can tell you about the author-led peer review model. Actually, you guys can solve that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really good question. I think the reason that we traditionally don't have editors in a traditional role involved in Open Research Europe is because of all the issues that traditionally you see in terms of screening out content that would have been good to be shared and is really important to be shared. So we have tried very hard to change the nature of what an advisory board does versus an editorial board. But you're right, you still, you know, community specialties and are really, really important. We do use author, as Victoria mentioned, we have what we call author-driven peer review. So we get the authors involved in selecting the reviewers, screening out for all conflicts of interest like you would with any other publishing venue, but also then using algorithms to find people as well. But you know, if as we evolve that we need to build more communities into something like this, then the platform is entirely flexible to be able to do that. And that's the kind of feedback we'd like from the community, right? I think that's right, Victoria, right? We're evolving this and we're seeking feedback. We totally want community-driven review. We want peer review of the best quality, you know, of the right people reviewing. And if in some way we're missing that, then we'd welcome that feedback. So I think it's just seeing how it pans out, and of course you can see who's reviewing them. So if your work is submitted and somebody inappropriate, or you don't feel they're not reviewing for you, then it's very transparent again. Whereas in a closed system, you have no idea who's reviewing your work. So again, there's kind of ways to use this transparent system to help refine and build a publishing model that really suits science to the best effect. I don't know, Victoria, do you want to add to that?
No, I need to second what you said. Actually, I mean, the idea of allowing publication without an editorial board is very, very important. I mean, we do all remember that Einstein's paper could not be published in the beginning because an editorial board was blocking him. So we are doing away with this. So I think this open and transparent system is doing away with some of the flaws of the very closed system. Also, you know, the best reviewers. Yeah, I mean, I used to publish in archaeology, and colleagues would say, well, you know that they send me your papers to, you know, to review. I'm like, oh yeah, okay. So it also broadens the system, but I think the author, as Liz said, is involved in us, you recommend reviewers. So ORA goes and F1000 goes and asks, you know, these reviewers are asked to act as reviewers. So they should be appropriate. They should also have no conflict of interest, as all these things are checked as well. So all in all, I mean, it does use the highest standards. But also what Liz said about community, it just started, but for now, I mean, you can browse the platform in different ways, but I anticipate that in the future, when more content comes in, then you will start building communities and other gateways or collections. I could see how some of them could be curated in the future, so that they could serve more an interested community. So, but I guess these things are also built around some content and some interest, and the platform just began. So I think the sky is the limit.
I am gonna have to cut off. I think the office does need to take over this Zoom because we're using the GIA office's Zoom. But I do again want to encourage everyone to type. I will share with all the panelists that doc over email. So if you do have a few minutes to answer any questions there, and like Liz mentioned, they are looking for this kind of feedback and discussion. So please do add your comments to that Google Doc, and I will make sure that gets back to everyone. Thank you so much again. If everyone who spoke can just turn on their videos again so we can just say thank you and see your faces again. Well, yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And I will be in touch over email. Thank you so much to the office also for being patient with us.